Senator John Cornyn, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Good to be with you, Jack.
So you're running for a 5th term and voters want to know why they should re-elect you and what more do you want to accomplish?
Well, I think experience matters, relationships matter in terms of effectiveness, and I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do, for example, working with Governor Abbott to get the state of Texas reimbursed for $11.1 billion that were spent on securing the border when Joe Biden refused to do it. I think it's a privilege, obviously, to represent all the folks in our great state. Keeps growing by about 1,600 people a day. But I also don't want to turn the seat over to somebody who I believe is unfit for the job and somebody who is not running for the right reasons. So I'm determined to do 2 things. One is to remind people what I've done, my support for President Trump and his agenda. I think that's important to Republican primary voters. And also to remind people what the Attorney General has done and what his record is. As you probably saw, there was a poll result that I guess Colin Allred released a couple of days ago showing that he would likely win against a Ken Paxton Republican nominee for Senate. We haven't elected a Democrat in 30 years in Texas, and we shouldn't start now. And that's what a nomination of my opponent would produce, along with hundreds of millions of dollars being spent trying to save him that could be used to pick up Senate seats in places like Georgia, Michigan, and New Hampshire.
So is that your message to Republican primary voters, many of them grassroots conservatives who favor Paxton? Is that your message to them? Be careful who you vote for?
Well, I think that's part of the message, certainly, but I think ultimately, Jack, I think this is a test of character and whether character still matters. What I hear from the Paxton camp is that all of the problems he's had, all the self-inflicted damage he's inflicted on himself, that's all baked in the cake and that people don't care. I believe that character does still matter, and I believe I've demonstrated I can be trusted and that I have been effective on behalf of the state of Texas. It's too important, this job's too important to send somebody up there who basically wants to become a part of the performance artists in Washington, D.C., who want to be famous, they want to raise money, they want to get the most clicks on social media, but they don't really want to do the hard work. I've demonstrated that I am willing to do the hard work and I enjoy it. And Texas deserves effective representation.
So with regards to the Republican primary, and I know there have been a couple of polls, 3 polls now that show the race is tightening, but we're still 6 months away.
We are.
So there's a lot of time. And I'm just wondering, when you listen to all the analysts, they say, because the grassroots conservatives who are most apt to go out and vote in the primary favor Paxton, that you've got to really bring in a lot more Republicans, a lot more people into the primary. And so how do you intend to do that?
Well, I think while there is certainly some support for the Attorney General out there based on this perception that he is some sort of MAGA warrior and that he is favored even by President Trump. But I know President Trump well. I've worked with him closely for a number of years now. And I know what he really cares about is his agenda and what he got elected on. So it is early, as you point out, but we've already seen that the polls have moved closer together based on just some very simple messaging based on my voting record supporting President Trump. And now it's essentially a dead heat. We knew this was going to be a competitive election all along, but it does matter to your question about who shows up at the polls. And I've been encouraging as many people as I can to vote, because with a low turnout election, if we nominate somebody who's unelectable in the general election, Republicans and the state will be harmed the most. So this is an important race, and I believe we will see a significant turnout, and I'm certainly going to be encouraging everybody I can to exercise their right to vote.
You spoke about character before and the importance of it, and on social media just the other day, you responded to Ken Paxton's post on X about the new state law on posting a copy of the 10 Commandments in each classroom. And you said, might want to brush up on the 10 Commandments, Ken. What did you mean by that, and which of the commandments were you referring to?
All 10 of them. I think this is indicative of the hypocrisy that we've seen from the Attorney General, who pretends to be something he's not. And I think we've been reminded time and time again, from the impeachment, from the indictment that for securities fraud, to the whistleblower lawsuit, and what he's done to his own family, that he is self-destructive, he's reckless, and he can't be trusted. And so that was the thrust of that.
And how important is that as far as your message to voters, that they really think about it in your mind? Because you said before, a lot of people say it's baked into the cake. You don't think so, obviously.
No, I don't, and I think there's also danger if people who sort of read self-validating tweets or social media posts to get this idea that this is the universe of Republican primary voters. We know as a fact it's not. I won my last primary by roughly 76% in a multi-party primary. So I've been through this process before, won my last general election by 10 points. And so we know what we need to do, and that is remind people what I've done, remind people what Ken Paxton has done, and let them render their verdict. And I'm confident of the outcome.
But this is the toughest opponent you've ever had.
Well, he's the most problematic in the sense that he pretends to be something he's not. And part of our job is to tell the truth. And for example, he suggests that I have not been strong on the border. I've been endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, which is sort of the gold standard. I've supported President Trump every appropriation bill we've had to build the wall or to provide support to our men and women in the Border Patrol. And so much of this is constructed on untruths and frankly lies. And so we're going to be telling the truth. We're going to be disabusing people of the misimpression they may have about what my record is. And I'm confident that if we are able to tell our story and communicate that and to refute the misrepresentations and lies, then we're going to be successful.
What do you say to conservatives who were upset with the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which you really led after Uvalde? And I've heard some conservatives, and they characterize this as this bill incentivizing states to pass red flag laws. And so they were upset about that.
Well, Jack, I'm a conservative. I got a conservative record, and frankly, in that bill, we didn't do anything about red flag laws. Texas doesn't have one, but what we did make sure is the funding that was available to states that did have red flag laws was also available to Texas for crisis intervention, for training more school counselors, for hardening our schools, and providing for the single largest investment in community-based mental health care in American history, without infringing on the rights of a single law-abiding citizen. And you may have noticed that the Texas legislature actually followed our lead on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and extended background checks for mental health commitments and criminal records to 16-year-olds, which is basically the thrust of what the bill did. But it's not a good answer to these parents who lost their innocent children that we don't care and we're not going to do anything. That's essentially what some critics, the position they've taken. And I just think a lot of it is people are not necessarily informed about it. Rumors sort of get started about red flag laws or something else, and people sort of take that as a given. And again, the campaign's just starting, and my job And the job of my campaign is to get people the accurate information. And again, I'm proud of what we were able to do because I believe it saved lives and will continue to save lives.
I want to ask you about some headlines. Obviously, national attention over these new congressional maps here in the state of Texas. And what did you make of all this?
Well, I know that redistricting is one of the most contentious, most political acts that can be performed by a legislature. And it's very personal to members of the legislature because you're redrawing the lines they've run in. Their relationship with their constituents is maybe disrupted or changed. But Texas has changed over time. It's become more Republican. President Trump has made significant inroads into the Hispanic community, which I've always reached out to. These are folks who are culturally conservative. They should be Republicans, but they found a welcome home with President Trump, and now they deserve to be counted in the way these districts are drawn. But as you know, these will always end up in litigation, and so now the El Paso Federal Court is going to be considering this. But the law has also evolved as well. There's a Louisiana case you're probably familiar with where the court's taken up the question whether racial gerrymandering is constitutional or not, where minorities have an equal right to participate in the process. And because ordinarily race is a prohibited factor in terms of equal protection. So there's a lot of moving parts here, both factually and legally. But I'm confident these seats will be upheld.
I also want to ask you about inflation. We know it's gone down, obviously, since the record highs we saw during the Biden administration, but wholesale prices went up for the most they have in a while last month. And I'm wondering, how concerned are you about that? And is enough being done to try to, lower prices as much as we can possibly?
Well, of course, under the Biden administration, we experienced 40-year high inflation. And now the cost of virtually everything, whether you're a rancher or a farmer or just a house, just as somebody going to the grocery store, the prices of everything have risen 20% or more just as a result of what I believe was massive overspending by the federal government. And we've changed that somewhat, not as much as I would have liked with the One Big Beautiful Bill. We did $400 billion worth of deficit reduction. But inflation is a silent tax, and it eats up standard of living. It's something we need to be concerned about. It's something I know the Federal Reserve has been battling back and forth with the president on. Presidents typically like to have lower interest rates so the economy will grow, but then the Federal Reserve's mandate is to try to keep inflation at 2% or less. And so that's a battle we've seen before, and it continues today. But yes, inflation is a real problem. But one of the things that I've appreciated about President Trump is he's tried to shrink the size of the federal government. First through things like DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, but some with the reductions in force of government employees, and a number of measures which I believe will help some of the stress on prices of everything.
Where are you on tariffs? I know we talked about it earlier in the year. And at the time we talked, you said that the president is using this as leverage. Well, we've seen this play out over months now. And I just wanted to get your sense. I mean, is this now going to be a permanent thing? And because the Congressional Budget Office just released a report late last week saying that if the tariffs continue the way they are, it will reduce the deficit by $4 trillion over the next decade.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money, and so I'm wondering, once Washington sees that income, that revenue flowing into the government, is this going to become the norm, and do you support that?
Well, I think, there are winners and losers. I was in Texarkana yesterday, and one gentleman was talking about the steel industry. It's finally coming back in America, where we basically weren't building any new steel factories. We need that to build infrastructure. We need it for national security. And some of the tariffs on imported steel have made that possible. But the president, the thing that convinced me the most is the president talked about reciprocity being the standard, and that our goods and services that we export are treated by other countries the same as we allow them market access here. And that hasn't been the case, but, and I think that's beginning to settle out with the temporary pause on because of the negotiations. Now, in some other areas, like the 50% tariff that the president put on India to discourage them from continuing to buy below market Russian oil, which they refine and sell on the open market, that fuels the Russian war machine in Ukraine, it's obviously not for trade purposes, it's for leverage, as you pointed out. So the president likes to use tariffs. So far, the law is with him, but there's also cases pending in, I think, the Court of International Trade, making its way to the U.S. Supreme Court to see how much of this flexibility he truly has. But so far, I think people are willing to give the president the benefit of the doubt and to try to see if the economy will then settle down. It's in the president's interest to make sure the economy is good, certainly during the midterm election when he wants to retain the majority in the House and the Senate. So I'm optimistic, but the jury's still out.
Do you support Senator Lindsey Graham's bill for the president to, for the Senate to pass it and the House, et cetera, to get to the president's desk that would really put heavy sanctions on Russia?
I support that. I'm a co-sponsor of it. I just believe Putin has shown himself unworthy of trust. He is an ideologue. If you study Russian history, if you study US history, and if you understand the roots of Putin's roots in the KGB, in the Russian intelligence services, he has these delusions of grandeur, and he doesn't consider Ukraine to be a country separate and apart from Russia. And so he's willing to sacrifice up 1 million soldiers so far. He doesn't care about any of the body count or any of the pain suffered by the Russian people in pursuit of his land grab in Ukraine. But I think his time is running out on Putin, and I think President Trump now feels like I think he understands who he's dealing with, and he's prepared to deal with that in one way or the other, but certainly sanctions, secondary sanctions, are an important part of that.
Two other questions. One of them being, you mentioned the amount of money that is in the President Trump's one big beautiful bill, as he calls it, which would give money back to the states, including Texas. Mm-hmm. How quickly is this process going? Because certainly the Texas lawmakers would like to have it.
Oh, I'm sure they would. There's a 90-day process to apply for reimbursement for border expenditures, and the governor is on top of that, and the clock is ticking away. Other states may be able to apply for some of that, although the way we wrote the law favors Texas, and there's $13.5 billion in that pot of money, and Texas should get the lion's share of that, hopefully $11.1 billion. So that work is in progress right now.
And I also wanted to ask you, you said you speak to the president often.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to find out, what is it that you talk about, and how important is it that you get his endorsement?
Well, I would very much like to get his endorsement. He endorsed me in my last election for the Senate in 2020, but so far he's remained on the sidelines and undecided. I respect that. We can't wait around. We have to continue to do what we've been doing, raising money and educating voters about my record and the Paxton record. But I talked to the president about all sorts of things, including things like what he did in Iran. I remember one of my most recent phone calls with him, I congratulated him for his courage in authorizing the Air Force to commission these B-2 bombers to fly 35 hours round trip from Missouri and drop bunker busters down the ventilation tubing of the Iranian nuclear machine. It took 145 different planes to accomplish that. This was masterful. No other country in the world could do it. But can you imagine the president making that call? It was the right call to make, and I called him and supported him and told him it was, I admired his courage for doing that. Not many presidents, I think, would be willing to take that kind of political risk and other risk to do what he had to do and did.
Senator John Cornyn, thank you so much. We
Thank you,
appreciate
Jack.
it.